Hello, it is Monday. We're doing the weekend roundup on FUD Yourself. Today, Kiara got a haircut, if you're wondering.
Yes.
So this is actually still Kiara, but just with the shaved head. Just kidding. A good friend of ours, Ben Grout, used to work with us, Chainlink ambassador, and just an overall steward of space. Welcome, bro.
Thank you, man. Good to be back.
Good to be back. That's right. You're gonna have to come back for our 100th episode too. I think we're doing something kind of interesting, which is
when is that? 5th of July?
Yeah, like it's coming up pretty quick, actually. Kind of surprising.
Hey, let me put the uniform on. I'm not. Here we go. Now.
Oh shit! See, we look exactly the same now, right?
Without even organizing it, we just both happen to have white backgrounds, no hair, glasses.
Yeah, we have the same hairstylist, I guess, but that's about it. Anyway, okay, so we got a whole bunch of shit to talk about today.
Yes.
Obviously, the weekend was not a dull one in crypto land, or at least in regulation land. So we're going to talk about Mercado and some institutional licenses that they received in Brazil. Talk about the GBA. They had annual achievement awards. So we'll talk about a couple of those just because I think GBA is doing great things to legitimize the space globally. And some of the award recipients were pretty awesome. Circle deploys USDC on Arbitrum, why that's important. We'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about interest rates, what that means, because that's super exciting. And then we'll talk briefly about Fidelity. And if you haven't heard the news story, it was in news this morning, so we have no chyrons or anything for it. But Ben and I have some opinions on all that shit, and we'll talk about it. Quickly, shout out to Tatum. Loving the merch. Love this shirt. It's super soft and cozy. So thanks, Tatum. And with that, we will get started. All right, we are back and not quite on Twitter Spaces yet. This is what happens when Kiara's not here. Just give me 1 second and we'll get the spaces set up. La-di-da. All right, maybe Ben, you can join. There it is. Let's get on Spaces. Okay, right. Now we're cooking with fire. No memento. All right, so while we're waiting for the spaces, maybe we can set up the first bit of news. Mercado secures a payment institution license in Brazil, which is kind of interesting. We've been talking a lot about Brazil lately with respect to, they were like anti-crypto for a minute and they put a whole bunch of restrictions in for a minute, and then they had an election, and now their stance has changed quite significantly, such that they're really actually vying to be a meaningful player, I think, especially in South America, but generally around the globe in terms of trying to pioneer and be a big part of blockchain innovation. Anyways, so effectively what this license allows them to do is, well, really a lot of things. They're an exchange, so they can now meaningfully participate in Brazil legally as an exchange. The license came right from Brazil's central bank, so it's obviously pretty legit. It allows them to operate as an electronic money issuer, offer digital banking services, fixed income investments, staking, like all of this stuff. So it's kind of like a blanket license almost to do pretty much everything. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, they've got a good on-ramp, off-ramp as well, right, from fiat. So effectively, this just opens up the whole space of crypto payments to anyone in Brazil to access it more easily, right? So especially as they have the payments license, I think this paves the way for more of an uptake in using crypto to pay for everyday things.
You got to mute yourself or unmute yourself, bro, on Twitter Spaces. People can't hear you.
How about now?
There you go. Now you're cooking.
All right. Yeah. So I was going to say, I think that this is a big step in the move forward to be able to use crypto in day-to-day spending, right? So we've all seen cases of it being used to buy art or a house or these kind of one-off things, but still it's not mainstream. Well, this is a huge step, in my opinion, for Brazil to be able to actually go out there and buy day-to-day things using crypto, because it removes a lot of the barriers. How it goes through in reality, the actual user interface, I'll be really interested to see what they build now. They've got all these licenses, this legal ability to use it. But from a legal perspective, this is great news, I think.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's great for South America. It's great for Brazil. I think it's great for crypto in general. Another large nation, supporting, especially a BRICS nation. I think Brazil has hinted that they may also de-dollarize and move away from the US. So I think this has implications beyond just what it means for Brazil, but also what does that mean for the rest of the world geopolitically. But what I'm most interested in is what getting this license entailed. I don't know, and none of the articles that I read had any information on like how long it took, what the cost was, because that's what we've been talking about. So with respect to regulation in North America and other jurisdictions, is part of the equation is we need rules. We may not love them all, but at least once we have rules and guidelines and goalposts, at least we know, what we have to do. But the second part of the equation is how difficult is it? What is the barrier to entry? And so that's been the biggest criticism. And Ben, you've spent the majority of your adult life in traditional finance. And
right.
So one of the big advantages for an incumbent in traditional finance, but the massive blockers to innovation, is the barriers to entry are extraordinarily high. Like to get a banking license or to get a lot of the major licenses needed to operate in TradFi, it is not a small feat. And so I'm curious what, hopefully we'll have a follow-up on this maybe later in the week. Curious what they went through, because this now sets a new precedent, right? And that's what's exciting about this. As soon as somebody has done it, another example is this Prometheum thing. There's a lot of, I don't know if you've been following the Prometheum
No, I haven't. Tell me.
Scandal or whatever. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around Prometheum because they kind of came out of nowhere, raised a bunch of money, got the first and only special purpose broker dealer for digital currencies in the US. No one's heard of them. Then they got to speak in the House at the hearings. It's kind of like, what? Like
echo of FTX there, maybe.
It seems a little weird. But all of that to say, there's another way to look at that. And yeah, whatever. That could be weird. There can be some weird shit going on. I don't have an opinion on it. But there's now a path that can be followed. And in theory, if you do the same stuff that they've done, if you achieve whatever milestones are required, there should be a path to getting these types of licenses now. And so same thing in Brazil. I think hopefully it's not too cumbersome to get all this shit, but I guess we'll find out.
I think it comes down to whether they want to treat cryptocurrency as currency, make it like Bitcoin, for example, legal tender, or they want to treat it as an asset. And a lot of regulations swing which way you're going to put it, which bucket you're going to put it in. Is this going to be an asset? Does it need to be treated like an asset and taxed like an asset? Or is it a legal currency? And we're seeing a lot of countries make Bitcoin tender, legal tender, or try to. So that's positive. I think that is probably going to open a lot of different doors to try and make it an investment asset. But it comes down to how the different regulators around the world going to pigeonhole this.
Yeah, I suspect that not all cryptocurrencies will be considered payment mechanisms, or I think most of them will be considered investments, but Bitcoin possibly, and there's others obviously that could be considered, I think, forms of payment, which I think is quite interesting. Yeah, man, I don't know. Like that, I've been a big proponent of regulation in a lot of ways. I know it's going to cause a lot of headache for most people, but for most entrepreneurs, obviously, I think it's going to be a nothing burger for most users. Like you have to KYC, but I mean, you're already KYCing on your on and off ramps pretty much everywhere in the world anyways. So, I mean, I've been saying all along, like all those people that are holding on to the anonymity, privacy, it doesn't exist anyways. So like, let's kind of give that up and move on. And I like to see that these countries are doing, at least making progress. Whether we agree with how they do it or not, at least there's some progress, and it allows entrepreneurs in those jurisdictions to meaningfully participate. Anyways, okay, we will move on from Brazil and talk a little bit about the GBA. GBA is a Global Blockchain Association, a lobby, effectively a lobby and industry group that I think is amazing. They have really good conferences. We're members, of course, and they do a lot of really important work in DC, but also they're doing a lot of work, which is highlighted, I think, by the awards that were given out at their annual awards thing. And they're doing a lot of work to expose, different global organizations, as in their name, Global Blockchain Association, but just expose them to blockchain, support them through, innovative new applications. And I think it's just great. So this is a bit of a shout out to the GBA, just because I think this is a really important support structure for the industry and for blockchain technology globally. And obviously I'm a big fan. They rewarded quite a few different groups here. There's the United Nations was one of them, which is kind of cool. It's going at the bottom.
Yeah, that was really interesting. They're using it to administer their pension fund, right? So that that's the first time
it's a DID solution, though, decentralized digital ID, which is kind of interesting. Of all places, the United Nations Pension Fund is one of the first to institute this.
That's what my thought was.
Digital ID.
I mean, I think it's great. It's obviously one of the best use cases, and there's a lot of companies out there. There was one that gave a presentation here in Austin about tracking fertility clinics when they've taken, eggs off for storage, etc., using it as a data tracking and ID tool.
Right.
And you don't hear a lot of cases about that. All the ones about, the finance and investing and lending and all this sort of DeFi stuff gets wound up. There's not so many times I hear one where it's used to actually track data. So I'm all for this. I'm excited to see that the UN is using it to not just to track general stuff data, but the pension data. So clearly they've put a lot of time and effort into this. I think this is fantastic news.
Yeah, I mean, the UN, obviously, it's great to see. I'm a big fan. I think I've told this story a few times, but we'll tell it again just for fun. When I first came into blockchain and crypto in 2015, 16, one of the biggest inflection points for me was being part of an accelerator program. It's a long story that I won't get into, but being part of an accelerator program that accelerated blockchain tech into the US government. Excuse me. And at that time, they were already doing stuff with DID. They were doing a lot of really interesting things with supply chain management and inventory management and so on. And that's actually what was a huge inflection point for me, because publicly at that time we were talking about Ethereum. It was just starting in a meaningful way. We had all of this ICO craze in 16, 17, and all of these like effectively vaporware products and coins. And this, to me, was just eye-opening that, holy crap, like these are all private commercial applications, but the technology was so much more applicable already at that time than many of us thought about. It's not just DeFi, it's not just PFPs and NFTs and so on, although all of those things are incredibly important and build community, build evangelism, and are evidence of some of the value that the technology brings to the world. I think there's many other things that are happening that we just don't hear about because we're not invested in this stuff. So some of the other award winners, I think there was another one from, let me pull it up here, just make sure I don't screw it up. Where were the other ones? Yeah, so there was Jurat Blockchain. They have started integrating blockchain with legal court processes, which is kind of cool. I don't know anything about this, but I think that's another area. I think for chain of custody, for evidence and testimony, like, the stenographers and having all of that kept in an immutable environment. I think there's really, really cool applications here that can also peg ownership of certain IP or certain arguments made by certain attorneys, because AI is going to come in now and shake up the legal world, I think. And it'll be interesting. Who do we attribute some of these ideas to? How does that happen? How do we make the space a lot more transparent and immutable? And I think this is just this is an amazing step. Any thoughts on blockchain in the legal space?
If in these situations they're going to start to put some evidence on the blockchain, like stuff like I don't know if you ever get any CCTV footage or anything like that, or police body camera footage, whether that's going to be made publicly available through blockchain. These sorts of things that could really transform the legal systems. It depends the on-ramp for the data, right? How are we going to get video footage into a blockchain managed database and then easily accessible? And what are the laws around when can the public see that information? But
well, and I think even for discoveries and disclosures, right? Like often they show the evidence, they claim that the prosecution will show the evidence that they have to the defense, so they have time to respond and think about it. But do they show all the evidence? I don't know. Are they mischaracterizing evidence? I don't know. All of this can bring a hell of a lot of transparency to the space, which I think is great. I've been saying this forever. Like, cryptocurrencies aside, like let's take the currency piece away from this and the tradability of tokens and crypto assets. But the actual innovation of blockchain technology, like what the blockchain actually does, the applications are effectively endless. Like, I still believe wholeheartedly that within a decade or so, very similar to how the internet underpins pretty much everything we do, including my refrigerator at this point. Maybe blockchain won't be that advanced in a decade, but I think we'll see blockchain underneath the hood of so many technologies. We won't even know that it's there, but it's going to be leading to a lot more.
There's always that adage, right, where people underestimate how much something can grow in a year. Overestimate how long it can be in a year, but underestimate it in 10 years. So you never know. It could be, kettle, fridge, the whole lot linked. I'll be interested to see how much municipalities, governments, councils move forward to putting stuff on the blockchain. So the fact that the UN's gone down that route now, will tax government spending be publicly available on the blockchain? Is there enough incentive for that with governments, or does that maybe lift the rock they don't want to have lifted, so they're not going to rush to do it? But it could do, right? And then could you apportion tax spending in local cities and councils based on the usage of the service? So if some cities have a higher density of schools, more funding goes to them, or to roadways. There's so many variations. But then,
are you running for office? Sounds like you're running for office.
I don't think so. But then the question comes in, well, why would they spend the money to build that in a hurry if they don't have to? So it could definitely transform the world. But
I think, enough public pressure, though, once we start seeing how much transparency and legitimacy and increased security this brings to so many other sectors, I think public service, government, et cetera, they do work for us in the end. They're aside from like classified information, national security information, stuff like that, the finances of how things are being used and spent and all of that, we should not have to FOIA request all of that stuff. It should be
the biggest one for me on that front would be, I don't want to have to keep filling out my taxes. Can you just put everything I spend and do on the blockchain, and then it automatically tell me, is someone from TurboTax watching this right now? Can you get working on that? Because I'm not. I'd love to automate that so that I couldn't get it wrong and I can't get audited and my numbers be incorrect. That would be fantastic.
So there's a lot of countries that do that already. Like Finland is an example. We've got some partners that live in Finland, and they have a lot of tax automation. Like, more or less, it tells you what you owe, and then you go back and just make sure that their math is correct. Yeah. Seems like a much more streamlined process than the $100,000 a year I spend on baloney CPAs all over the place here to deal with taxes and corporate and personal and crypto, corporate, personal.
It's definitely a mess in the US. Moving from the UK, it's hard work here for sure.
It's not an easy task. Anyways, okay, there's some other really cool ones. We're not going to go through all of them, the awards, but there was this Sari Kazim or whatever driving adoption in the Middle East and North Africa. Obviously, that's important. There was a group that was working on farming, which I think is a really interesting application. I grew up on a farm, so I can see a lot of value in tracking, where certain crops came from, where certain shipments came from, what the inputs were, if certain fertilizers or certain seeds or different things were used. I think there's a lot of ways to quite simply track that stuff, where right now, the database infrastructure and all of that is gated and challenging and confusing. So really, really interesting innovations. There's some other stuff coming, that received awards also, but if you're interested, we'll post the link to the article in the chat, and you guys can check it out. Okay, we're going to move on to Circle. So We talked a little bit a couple weeks ago about Euro C, the Euro coin that Circle launched, which I think is amazing. It opened up a totally new dimension of foreign exchange, and a lot of banks and institutions are looking at that as potentially being the largest FX market in the world is euro to US dollar currently. And like, I can't remember the volumes, but it's like an insane amount of volume on a daily basis. And it's quite expensive. FX in TradFi is not cheap unless you're doing massive blocks. Even then, it's still not super cheap. You could do that on the blockchain in an efficient swap scenario for cents on the dollar, like cents total, not on the dollar, cents total, which is kind of incredible. And so, and it's, near instant settlement, global access, 24/7. Like, I think it's really exciting to see what they're doing. So Circle, of course, is deploying USDC natively on many different ecosystems. Arbitrum is now the most recent that is getting Circle support. I think this is great. It reduces bridge risk. It allows a lot more direct transfers out of centralized exchanges and different things right to those ecosystems without it having to be wrapped and bridged and all this other nonsense. It reduces a lot of security concerns for DeFi protocols and other dApps that are using bridged assets. I think this is great. How do you feel about Circle?
Yeah, I think very positive. I mean, we can't mention Circle without mentioning Ripple. Both of them big players in this space in terms of shifting value using cryptographic data and blockchain. Both of these companies are really pushing forward here. I'll be really interested to see them get over that early adoption, start getting big enterprises to move value internationally, and if possible through in ramps and off ramps, sort of avoiding that FX fee you do through typically my historic world of fiat. There's just that bit of fear now in the market. Market's down. We were ramping up. We were trailblazing, and then everything fell apart. Everyone's monkey PFP fell apart and isn't worth anything anymore. So because of that, ironically, moving on.
Don't make fun of my PFPs. None of my PFPs were ever worth anything, so don't worry.
If that hadn't, I would have been fascinated to see where we'd be now if the market hadn't dipped. Obviously, everything has to dip eventually. So, coming from the payment space, being able to move funds for a matter of cents, millions and millions of dollars of worth of equivalent globally around the world, that will blow a lot of the banks out of the water. Yeah. Circle and Ripple at the front of this, right? But banks are starting to look at it as well. So we know JP's putting stuff out there. It's a really interesting space because if you think at the moment, a lot of international exchange of value is delayed, waiting for wires and the SWIFT network to deliver, or checks to be used, still massive in the US. If you could instantly clear value to anyone in the world, how would that change every other industry? So for example, shipping, a lot of shipping right now is you still pay by a bill of lading and a check attached to it. So if it was instant to anyone, anywhere, and then on-ramps and off-ramps were smooth, this is just another step towards that, I think.
Well, and I think the more institutions that start using this, that's a really good point, actually. Using the shipping example, often there's a certain amount that's paid when it leaves its origin. When it lands at its destination, there's another inspection that's done and all of this stuff. You can automate almost all of that in smart contracts. You don't need SBLCs, which are, in my opinion, a joke anyways, because they're not really worth the paper they're written on. People try to resell them. It's a hot mess. I spent a good amount of time in resource sales, resource transactions, I guess, not sales, but it was a nightmare. This would have made life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah. You can standardize this, and then you also build the infrastructure to exchange the data through smart contracts. And obviously, I've got to do a shout out to Chainlink here. They are leading this space by far. If you can standardize how you exchange data through smart contracts and all the associated technology to it, so that there's a level of comfort for big enterprises, yeah, it will fundamentally change the efficiency of the world. Like, just fundamentally, our children, if I'm ever lucky enough to have children, find someone settle down, will never understand the complexity and the time it would take sometimes to get shipments and payments through. It blows my mind that I can order something on Amazon, have it at my door same day already. Yeah. If the process, all the things that require shipping for that become even more efficient, it's honestly, it's going to be this. This is one small step towards that world where everything is almost instant everywhere in the world.
Well, it's big. And another problem with, like, when you get POs, as an example, if you're a production company and you get a PO from a large retailer, often you're not getting paid anything until later, and there's no way to claw it back. There's no legal smart contract logic where everybody's comfortable. And then you wait. What is it? T plus 30, T plus 60. Like,
it depends how big the buyer is, right?
Exactly.
These out there have 180 day working capital cycles because they just can. Supermarkets historically, I mean, they pay farmers 6 months later. Just like that.
It's insane. There's no reason for that in this day and age. And now the technology is obviously evolving. The only other thing I wanted to mention on this, Circle, there's been a lot of FUD over the years about, actual, backing. Is it one-to-one, yada, yada. I think most of that now has been dispelled. There's still some risks in the way that some of these assets could potentially depeg from the US dollar based on their volumes traded on decentralized exchanges, which are not very efficient from a pricing perspective. I think we're getting closer to having more solid confidence in what USDC is doing. And I think Tether somehow, by the skin of their teeth, was able to reorg what they were doing with their backing, because they had commercial paper in China. They owned like real estate globally, like a whole bunch of illiquid assets. I think they've now been able to right that ship, I think. We still don't have transparency reports on that.
Huge reserves of Shiba Inu as their backing.
What?
There was one after the whole FTX piece. Everyone came out and said that just show their proof of reserve. There was one, was it an exchange that 20 to 30% of their reserves was Shiba Inu coin. Which one? I'll have to look it after this. But yeah, I mean, the FTX thing was devastating, but there was some, I think, silver lining in that. Proof of reserve became a hot topic, right? Yeah. And there are now robust processes in place. Again, shout out to Chainlink. And that's the last one I'm going to keep bringing it. But they have proof of reserve solutions as well, where you can see exactly, like, it's transparent, right? Yeah. And that there's always going to be teething issues, but it was really disappointing that so many people lost their life savings through the FTX piece, I think. And then the Terra Luna also, again, that wasn't proof of reserve, obviously, but some of the silver linings coming out of that was helped here. So yeah, I think Terra's a better place. Circle never had the level of doubt, I think, in the market.
But they did lose, like, there was a DPEG scare kind of around the same time as BUSD DPEG scare happened, where everybody was panicking about USDC. And I thought, I mean, guys, this USDC is backed one-to-one, a dollar for every USDC that's in circulation. And so, I mean, yeah, it could DPEG, but there's still value, like the arbitrage, which is what happened. The arbitrage just makes sense. If it gets DPEG'd far enough, you buy a whole bunch of it at a discount, convert it back to US dollars, and Bob's your uncle. So anyways, lastly, before we end the stream for the day, interest rates. We talked about this last week. FOMC is on Wednesday, so we talked about it on Thursday. They announced a pause. Obviously, the markets took a dump and recovered, and they're pretty much flat. The Dow's pretty much flat since that announcement. There's a lot of speculation that it means the market expected it, obviously, and that people aren't getting too excited because there's still inflation concerns. It has gone down from 9% to, I don't know, somewhere in the fours, I think 4.3, 4.4. I can't remember the exact number. We talked a little bit last week about the unemployment rate and how it's historically low, but that's very misleading because there's a lot of complete non-participation in the labor market by people between the ages of 20 and 40, which is super concerning, especially as we run into these entitlement problems coming up soon. Anyways, I have tons of thoughts on the interest rate thing, but I don't want to take up all the mic time here. What do you think, my friend, given what you do?
So this has been, the fiat space has been, like, especially interest rates, been my world for about 10 years. I think a couple of things here. The way the US government measures inflation isn't the most efficient. Yeah. If you want a true measure of where inflation is at right now, I would go to Trueflation, funny enough, crypto company. They have 1 million data points they trawl every single day, and they have a much better real-time inflation measure. I think it's over 1 million. It might even be more than that. I'm probably getting that wrong.
We were actually at a Chainlink event that you were hosting. I was on a panel with them. Yeah, it's a really intriguing product.
Mm-hmm. I would look at inflation if you haven't. That they probably have a month to 2 month head start and a real-time view on it. The big question is, and this is layers and layers of different factors here, is the US dollar going to continue for the next 50 years to be the world reserve currency?
Right.
A lot of doubts in that. And I think a lot of people who are watching this podcast probably wanted to switch to Bitcoin. That's why you're watching this. Big things in this space, not just the reserve, but also the fact that the first non-dollar oil trade went through recently. I think it was China, but I might be wrong. That's a big deal, right? So historically, dollars were used to buy and sell US dollars all around the world. The fact that that's changed, that's a very big deal. This interest rate, come back to this market or increased pause. If you look at a lot of the big economists in fiat banks, this was expected. It was actually expected 2 or 3 months ago. And then you had what we spoke about last time, those mid-tier to small banks failing in the US, which then kind of kept the interest increases rolling for another couple of months.
Yeah.
So I personally have been expecting this pause now for about 3 months. It comes at a good time, I think, because I think it's starting to really hit the housing market.
Yeah.
You put interest rates above 5%, mortgage rates are going to be at 8%. That's what we're seeing. And then you end up switching the market there. So there's so many knock-on effects here. It's hard to take a true steer where it's going to go, but inflation is down, according to the US government. I'd be interested to see if Trueflation agree with that. Bringing interest rates down has to happen eventually. Like, it's great if you're saving money right now, but it's not great on a lot of other measures. Everyone's mortgages are through the roof, their car loans, this sort of stuff. So it's two sides of the same coin. One side improves or the other side goes down. So I'd like to see these rates come down closer to 2.5%.
Powell was saying that they plan actually to still have a couple more increases to 5.75 or potentially 5.95 by the end of the year or something. I think that's just to keep a healthy level of fear in the market so everybody doesn't go bananas. Which is
my personal opinion is the same. I don't think they can comfortably push another 0.5% higher without toying with a potential housing market crash.
Well, among many other things, but not specifically limited to residential housing, but also commercial real estate it's going to take a pounding anyways, in my opinion. Like, once they have to revalue all of these things based on new rental rates and cash flows, they're all underwater.
All trying to factor in that people aren't going into the office anymore. COVID was 2 years ago. There hasn't been time for everyone to adjust yet. So all those corporates that aren't re-signing their corporate leases, those are coming up now and for the next 5 years. If you continue to keep interest rates high, it really puts a lot of pressure on the commercial real estate market. And then they have a lot of money and are very well connected typically. Depends how conspiracy theory you want to get, but
I've got a whole bunch of theories on the COVID thing, but that was an unintended consequence, I'm sure. They didn't want this to happen as a consequence of COVID.
What if you could borrow more easily in crypto at a lower interest rate and then fund your mortgage through that in different markets around the world? This is all good for the adoption of Bitcoin. The more uncertainty there is of dollars, in my opinion, but we need to make the on-off ramp smoother and the ability to borrow smoother, the ability to KYC people we're lending to so we don't end up with another housing crisis because they're over-leveraged. There's so many layers that need to be built, but if it's done correctly, this will just speed up the move to Bitcoin as a reserve globally than US.
For anybody that's listening, we have really good friends and partners at a company called Quadrata. And they're doing some incredible stuff with Quadrata passports, which is a DID piece, KYC, AML, PEP screening. They also have a partnership, and I believe it's live already, with TransUnion. So they can pull your credit on chain, but they can also report credit activity from chain back. Nice. So that's the first one that I'm aware of that has a two-way street with a real world credit management agency or credit reporting agency, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm super excited about it because I think it opens the door for a whole bunch more financial products on chain once it's, battle tested and so on. But
I haven't heard of anyone getting a residential mortgage through crypto. I'm sure that it must exist somewhere, but it's not.
Not that I'm aware of. Like, I think you still have to collateralize it with some other asset, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people that have collateralized their shit coins, taken enough cash out and bought a house and are paying it off as if it was a mortgage, but it's not using the house as collateral, which I think requires credit, which requires, meaningful repercussions if you don't pay. Otherwise, the same thing with under collateralized lending, right? Like the yield in DeFi is challenging right now because everything is over collateralized. It's how you can get the money multiplier in effect and under collateralize things, which I don't want to rush to because we know what happens when there's too much leverage in the system. But I think there has to be a meaningful transition towards under collateralized lending to a certain extent. And products like Quadrata, again, shameless plug for our friends at Quadrata, but check them out. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. You're going to see them on a lot of our protocols rather soon. So big fans. Anyways, one final note before we end for the day, Fidelity. So last week I had a lot to say. So did Kiara. We actually disagreed pretty vehemently on a few things with respect to BlackRock and their ETF and so on and what it means for the space. Well, today Fidelity doesn't want to be outdone as the second largest asset manager in the world, or third maybe, behind BlackRock and Vanguard, I think. They don't want to be outdone, and they're also now applying for a Bitcoin ETF. I think it's going to be very hard for regulators to decline these behemoth entities applying for these things. It'll be interesting. In about 30 seconds, what are your thoughts on that one, Ben?
I think it's been a long time coming. There's no way that Fidelity is going to put in that kind of paperwork without having done their homework to know that they can do this comfortably. Yeah. There have been some, if you look at actually some of the key movements, there is some people from BlackRock and Fidelity have gone across to Coinbase over the last few years. So there's been some staff exchanging back and forth. Yeah. This isn't a surprise. It does further muddy the waters on, is Bitcoin an asset or is it a currency? And how is that going to be regulated? Is it going to be regulated as a security or not? It's gonna force the hand of regulators to really try and make a decision, right? So this is positive. I would hate to be in the office of the regulator now, sat there trying to figure out, well, what do we do with this? Do we?
Like you said before about the thing in Brazil, once one is approved,
there you go.
Then there is a path. Like they can't just blanket decline with obscure reasoning. Any other applications that happen, and once a Bitcoin ETF in the US, I mean, there are Bitcoin ETFs globally. There's some in Europe. There is some in Canada. Bitcoin and ETH have ETFs in Canada. But in the US, like it will just form the basis for so many financial products.
Exactly. And I'm going to be interested to see. So obviously, all three of those companies you mentioned are big pension fund providers. Yeah. And the general rule is there has to be a certain rating for pension money to go in, like BBB. So I'll be intrigued to see, does Bitcoin get a credit rating, agency credit rating now? Do they push for it to become high enough rated so that pension fund money can go in?
How do you even rate the credit?
How would you rate the stability of it? There's no accounts. There's no so that'd be fascinating, because I'm sure a lot of these big companies, big fund managers would love to put long-term money in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Well, trillions. So that would jettison Bitcoin price up. So I'm fascinated to see how that pans out.
What's really interesting about this, and we're way over time, which often happens when I have a guest on because they have a lot more interesting things to say than I normally do. And you obviously don't disappoint ever. But I think, like all in all, what we're seeing right now is most of the markets have taken a pretty big shit over the bear market, except for Bitcoin and ETH. They're 50. Both of them are over 50% of the holders are in profit still, which is pretty compelling, pretty interesting. And I think one of the only reasons why is that this has been happening in the background. BlackRock has been buying up assets, buying up Bitcoin, buying up DCG shares, as far as I know, Grayscale shares, really like increasing their exposure at the high end of the pyramid, and purchasing Bitcoin. And I think there's been a lot of people de-risking from Bitcoin, but we're not seeing it as as violently, I guess, as we have in previous cycles, because I think guys like Fidelity and BlackRock, if they're going to do ETFs, they're probably going to try to DCA in here while the prices are low. So they make some pretty good profit when they start selling their ETFs. So I think it's a huge boondoggle, I think, really, for a lot of these companies. It's great for the space. I'm excited. Anyways, Ben, brother, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for helping us out and joining. And with that, I say to you, my friend, go FUD yourself.